Okay, my friends, good evening. Welcome to Outlandish Talmud Stories and Outstanding Life Lessons, Part 22. Well, we're coming a long way over here. Tonight's topic is two roads diverged. Where to turn at the fork in life. I want to thank tonight's sponsors who have dedicated tonight's class, Jack and Vicky Minsky, in honor of Jack's birthday. Mazal Tov, Hashem should bless you with a Shnat Hatzlacha, a successful year filled with lots of happiness, lots of good health, lots of nachas and joy from your beautiful family. Mazal Tov. You can download the source sheet to tonight's class in the description by the video. Also, if you'd like to dedicate a class in the future to honor somebody, a birthday, an anniversary, some kind of celebration, or a memorial for a yard site, or for whatever reason, there's a link in the description as well, and that will truly help us continue to do what we're doing. Today is Giving Tuesday. It's a phenomenal day. Americans all across the country are donating millions and millions of dollars towards causes that are close to their heart. So it's been very inspiring to see so much money pouring in, not necessarily into our accounts, but at least into important causes in the country. So thank you to everybody who has helped us out and will continue to help us out. So, perhaps you remember the famous scene in Alice in Wonderland. Alice is lost in the forest. She's not sure where to go. She can't find her way back. And then she sees the Cheshire Cat. And she turns to the cat and says, "Which way to go?" And the cat says, "Well, I guess that depends where you want to go to." So she says, "Well, it doesn't really matter." So he says, "Well, if it doesn't really matter where you want to go to, then it doesn't really matter which path you'll take." So maybe sometimes in life it's good just to go with the flow and end up wherever you're supposed to end up. But tonight we're going to be talking about and thinking and discussing about we have a goal where we want to end up. And the question is, how do we get there? And what are the different paths we could take to get there? And what are the pros and the cons, the virtues and the shortcomings of each path? I'm reminded of a story that my grandfather, Zichrono Livracha, used to always say. My grandfather came from a family that were Tzanzer Hasidim of the community of Tzanz. Tzanz originated in the city of Nowy Tzanz in Poland, and the first Grand Rebbe of Tzanz, his name was Reb Chaim Halberstein. This is in the 19th century. And he was known as the Tzanzer Rebbe, he was known as the Divrei Chaim, that was the name of the sefer, of the work that he composed. Many times before the high holidays would come, he would stand up and relate the following story. He would say, there was once a person who was lost in the forest, and it's getting darker, and he's trying to figure how to get out. And he tries one path and it leads to a dead end. He tries another path that leads to a dead end. And every path he tries, and he always comes back to where he was. He can't find his way out. Suddenly, another person appears and asks him, "Hey, my friend, do you know the way out?" He's also lost. So this person answers, "Listen here, my dear friend, I don't know the way out. I know all the ways that don't get you out. I can tell you where not to go. And now let's hold hands together, and you and I will find the way out of here." And Reb Chaim used to always tell the congregation before the high holidays, "Friends, let's hold hands together. Together we could find the path, the way out, or the way in, the way where we want to be and where we should be." So that's what I want to talk about tonight. We have an outstanding story, an outlandish story. It's a very short story. It's short in words, but it's very large. It's very deep and dense with its ideas and lessons that we're going to try to take away. And whilst we're going to focus on one or two particular areas in life, but the truth is the principles that we're going to be discussing have applications in everything in life. So there's a lot for us to learn from and take away here. And let's start. I hope you have downloaded the source sheet. Tonight's story is from Talmud Eruvin, page 53b. Some background to this story so you should know where it's coming. First of all, it's about a rabbi that we've studied a couple times before, Rabbi Yeshua, the son of Hananiah. And this is 2nd century. And this is a man who, if you recall, we discussed many of his debates against the elders of Athens. He was a brilliant scholar, but also like a statesperson, a statesman, a spokesperson for the Jewish people. He would travel a lot to Rome, to Athens, having debates, teaching about the Jewish tradition, creating connections, lobbying with other host countries, important activities for the Jewish people. So in this passage of the Talmud, he says, 3 times in my life, unexpected people outsmarted me. In other words, he was somebody who was not used to ever being outsmarted. He was smarter than everyone else. But there were 3 times where he was humbled and he said, wow, they got me. So this is, I think, the second or the third one of those 3 examples. Let's read it out together. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani related. One time, I was walking along the path and I saw a young boy sitting at the crossroads. He reached a fork in the road. And I said to him, on which path shall we walk? Shall I walk in order to get to the city? He said to me, and he pointed, this path is short and long, and that path is long and short. Which one would you take? So Rabbi Yeshua says, I walked on the path that was short and long. He said short and long, but he said short. So I walked on that path. And it was going like a breeze. Suddenly, when I approached the city, I was getting closer. I found that gardens and orchards surrounded it, and I did not know the trails leading through them to the city. I encountered all kinds of obstacles and difficulties actually getting into the city. So the path was really short, but I couldn't get in. So I went back to I retraced my steps, came back to the boy at the fork of the road, and I said to him, my son, didn't you tell me that this way is short? I couldn't even get into town. He said to me, and didn't I tell you it was also long? I said short, but long. The other one is long, but short. I kissed him on his head and said to him, happy are you, O Israel, for you are all exceedingly wise from your old to your young. He was so excited that a young Jewish boy could outsmart him, which he did. And that's the story. Apparently, there was a short path that ended up being long, and there was a long path that ended up being short. What is this? What's the short, long path? What's the long, short path? Where are we trying to get to? The Talmud describes what the short, long one was. In other words, there was a short distance. It sounds like, but it was very difficult to get in there. It doesn't tell us the other one. The other one we imagine was a very long distance. However, it didn't have the kind of obstacles to get into the city, and therefore it was a longer one, but a shorter one because you could eventually get into the city. First, the commentaries point out something very interesting before we get into the actual meat of the story. The general theme that there's a boy sitting at the crossroads. Why was it a young boy? Could have been an old man, right? The same story could have happened with an old man sitting at the crossroads, but it was a young boy. Why? So some of the commentaries point out because there's a metaphor over here, or there's a lesson over here. Young boys, young adolescents in their formative years, getting ready to grow up and mature and become adults, they sit at crossroads in life. And they sit at crossroads to decide who they are and where they want to go and who they want to be and what they want to accomplish. Because life begins at a crossroad. You know, there's a beautiful story. It's a story that is actually related to what we're going to talk about further, because this coming Shabbat is going to be on the Hebrew calendar, the 19th of Kislev. The 19th of Kislev is a great day in the Hasidic calendar because it marks the day of the liberation, of the freedom of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, the great Tzaddik, the Baal Tanya, the author of the Tanya. He was in prison, his life was being threatened, and he was eventually released from prison and able to continue his amazing work. And we'll talk more about that episode in a moment because it's going to tie into what we're going to be learning about. Now, it's customary in many communities to make a very big farbrengen, a big gathering, a big suda, a meal to honor that day and that miracle. And so we're told that the grandson of the Alter Rebbe, his name is Reb Nachum, every year he would throw a lavish party for the entire community. He would invite not just the whole community, but all the community leaders, the many rabbis and presidents and other officials to come, and they would come and join. And he had a special dais at the front where he would fit all the dignitaries. And the custom was that at this gathering, every single year, to retell the whole story of who the Alter Rebbe was, where did he come from, what did he do, what did he accomplish, why was he in prison, how was he liberated, so you could really enjoy the festivity, understanding what we're celebrating. The way he would tell the story, though, is interesting. He wouldn't start off by where you would think he would start. The Alter Rebbe, a great tzaddik, a great sage, a great scholar, student of Mezrich, became his own Hasidic master, built his own community, authored the Tanya, authored the Shulchan Aruch, but he wouldn't just start there. He would go back much earlier into the life of the Alter Rebbe. He would go back to where the Alter Rebbe was 18 years old. And he would tell the following story. When the Alter Rebbe was 18, he had a big choice to make in life, because he wasn't sure if he should go to Mezrich. Mezrich was the home of the community, of the Hasidic community of Reb Dov Ber of Mezrich, or should he go to the great community of Vilna? In Vilna, there was the illustrious schools, the yeshivas, the academies, headed by the great Vilna Gaon, the Rebbe Eliyahu. Where should he go to advance his studies, to advance his spiritual journeys, maturation? He wasn't sure where to go. And eventually he said to himself as follows: going to Vilna, I'll be able to enhance my learning skills. Going to Mezrich, I'll be able to enhance my prayer skills, my spiritual journey. There are two different kinds of emphasis in these two communities. He said, learning, I know how to learn, which he did. So I can get better, but I need more help in my spiritual path, in my spiritual discovery. That's why I'm going to go to Mezrich. That's how we told the story. And first of all, why did he start there? I mean, why is that important to understanding the celebration many years later of the liberation from prison? And moreover, he would tell the story, and then suddenly a new dignitary would come in, or a new rabbi would come a bit late to the party. He would sit them at the front and would say, let's start the whole story again. And he retold that whole story when the Alter Rebbe was 18 years old. And then another time someone came in, so he would always, many times throughout the night, he would tell the same story starting from that point. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe once asked this question, why does he have to start from there? I mean, he didn't go back to his birth. He went back to what you should have spoken about. The arrest and the liberation. Why talk about something that happened much earlier in the Alter Rebbe's life? And the Rebbe answered something very, very profound and very important to all of us. Life begins when you're standing at a crossroad. Until you've made a choice, until you've made a decision, because you've been confronted by the fork in the road. Should I go here or should I go there? Should I be this or should I be that? What will become of me? Until you're faced with that question and made that decision, life hasn't really begun. You're just living on automated mode from when you're born, and you're being brought into this world by your parents and by your teachers and by your educators, and you're going along with the flow, and you could go along like that for a very long time, or some people probably go along like that for the rest of their lives. Life didn't really begin. However, at the crossroad, you make a choice, you make a decision. Now life begins, which is a very important idea. And we're going to come back to this as we go along in tonight's class. So here we are at the crossroads, and we're trying to figure out how to get to the city. And there's the short, long path, and there's a long, short path. So let's try to understand the story. What is this city we're trying to get to? And what are these two paths to get there? This story became such an important and famous story, so much so that when the Alter Rebbe wrote his Sefer Tanya, the famous Tanya work, which I'm sure many of you have hopefully at least heard about and maybe even taken a peek into, and if you're really good, you've actually studied it at great length. And I mean, we study it every single year. This is an annual cycle to study the Tanya piece every day. So every year you're relearning it. And when you're relearning it, it's not just learning from last year, but it's actually finding new insights, new discoveries, new depths every single year. And in his introduction to the work, which is like, it's a classic Hasidic work, if you don't know. It's really it's a groundbreaking work where he describes and he outlines his Jewish theological, philosophical belief and path of what's known as Chabad Chassidut, which we're going to talk about soon. And he says, I'm basing my whole work on this story in the Talmud. So this story will explain where I'm coming from and why I've developed the Chabad school of Jewish Hasidic spiritual thought and doctrine. What's going on in the story? So let's ask ourselves the question. Let's talk from a very spiritual point of view, an overarching spiritual idea, goal in life. What is the goal in life? Why are we here? What are we trying to achieve in our limited years in this world? So the answer is, in a nutshell, that the goal in life can be summarized by the Hebrew word. We're trying to achieve what the many spiritual masters call dveikut. Dveikut, which means simply connection, which leads to another word called geula, and geula means redemption. We're trying to achieve connections and redemptions. Connections because there's so much fragmentation in this world, right? What are we trying to connect with? We're trying to, first of all, connect with ourselves. The true you. Who are you? There's so many layers within us. The way our mind thinks, and our mind's never even sure how it thinks. And the way our heart feels, and it's not even sure how it should feel. And there's our behaviors, and there's our mood swings, and there's our ups and our downs, and our highs and our lows. Are you connected with yourself? Because you have a true identity, you have a soul, you have a mission statement, you have who you are. So a connection to self. From a connection from self to others, right? Essentially, all of humanity is supposed to be one, right? There's supposed to be a state of oneness in the universe. And this oneness and unity in the universe is what connects everyone to themselves, to their true essence, everyone to each other, connecting to the world around us, the world around us being connected to us, connecting to God, connecting the world to God, God to the world, right? Imagine this state of oneness that the prophet spoke about and that we're told will come at the end of days, which was God's intention when he created the world, where everything would be cohesive, everything would be like one singular unit, everything would work hand in hand together, and the world will be a true reflection of its creator, of how it should be, and everything would operate and behave in accordance, in sync with each other, which of course would end up being a world of peace and a world of harmony and a space where only good things happen, people are helping people, and a thriving human society is being built in a purposeful way. That's the dream. That's the connections we're all striving for. But ever since God created this world, and the world was created through a state of tzimtzum, a state of contraction, where God had to hide his light, hide his creative force, in order to hide his infinite self, in order to allow for a finite space to emerge where physical existence can be created and humans can be created. That was the first state of disconnect. And ever since then, there's been a whole series of states of disconnect. And so, from the beginning of time, this world was created in a very disconnected way, and the goal of all of us is to create these connections. So we're all striving in our personal lives, and then collectively, for these connections, which will bring about redemption. Personal and collective redemption. So think about a whole series of electrical circuits attached to a light bulb, perhaps. So if they're not connected, the light doesn't go on. And then sometimes there's a poor connection. So a poor connection, the light goes on, but it's a little shaky, it's a little hazy, it's flashing on and off. I have one of those lights in my house right now. It gives you a headache. A perfect connection creates a perfect light. That's what we're trying to achieve. So how do you get there? How do you create those connections? And so here's an insight into a very interesting passage in fairly recent Jewish history, 250 years ago. Because there were always throughout history the great Kabbalists. If you recall, Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai in the times of the Talmud, the author of the Zohar, the great Kabbalistic work, and throughout the ages, few people access Kabbalistic texts. And what the Kabbalah did, if you ever took a peek into the Zohar or any Kabbalistic work, is it does just that in a very complex, dense way, sophisticated way. It explores the spiritual science behind the universe and explains all of the different spiritual forces underlying the universe. Because when you, just like scientifically, if you understand all of these forces and all of these elements, you get to appreciate how everything emerges and then how we can bring everything together, so spiritually as well, of course. Now, that was pretty much inaccessible to most people, whether literally the Kabbalistic works were not in print or not accessible, or also the material was really difficult to comprehend. And so you have around the 16th century, the famous Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and a couple others who start to more popularize these Kabbalistic texts in ways, in language, in ideas that the masses could get a little more of a grip of. Still not to the masses, but at least more popularly widespread. But it wasn't until the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem, he came along and he really brought down these concepts and these themes in a much more simplistic way. And his goal was to give access to every single person the tools, the knowledge, the secrets of the formulas of the universe, so they're able to really understand them and act upon them to be able to create this world of connection, a world of unity. That was the Baal Shem Tov. Very often he would relay it through stories and through metaphors and through parables, and that was how to get everybody, from the great scholars to the simple folk, connected with trying to achieve what I would call a relationship with their creator. I think that's what made the Baal Shem Tov very unique over other scholars at the time, focusing on life as a relationship, whereas many others beforehand and even during his time and afterwards would view Judaism, Torah, mitzvot as duties, as responsibilities, and therefore this you must do, this you shall not do, this is the kind of life you must obey and follow, and that's all true. But the Baal Shem Tov twisted it in a way that he said, but really you're trying to create a relationship over here, you're trying to connect over here, and these are ways of connecting. So he really redefined the whole experience for everybody. Now, after he passes away, and then after his successor passes away, Reb Dober of Mizrich, we spoke about earlier, his students were phenomenal. He had a large group of incredibly brilliant students, each one a great tzaddik in their own right. And it's at that time that there becomes, if I may say, a pretty fierce debate. And the debate was, what is the real message of the Baal Shem Tov? And what is the real message of Jewish spiritual teachings? And what is the real goal of what we're trying to accomplish with Jewish spiritual teachings? And we could categorize two general groups that emerged, and they were pretty fierce against each other, like I mentioned. And we could say that one of the groups that emerged was the short, long path to the goal, and the other group that emerged was the long, short path to the goal. Let's explain this. What's the long, short, and what's the short, long path? In a nutshell, you could understand that it's all about when you're trying to achieve something, do you try to figure it out yourself? Or do you try to have others figure it out for you? Do you live up your own successes and work? Or do you have others do the work for you and you just reap the benefits from that? That's in a simple way, right? The long, short path says, the short, long path says, the path is short. Someone else will do the work for you. Rely on them. They'll spoon feed you. And then you'll have the benefits of all that knowledge or experience or whatever it is. That's a short path. However, it's long. Why is it long? Because at some point you're going to run into a challenge, into a difficulty that without having your own ownership and achievement of these successes, you're not going to truly be able to figure it out, and you're going to end up stuck. Versus the long, short path is the long path is you're going to try to figure it out yourself. You're going to do your own work, your own homework, your own exercises. You need to come to a true understanding and a realization of what it is they're trying to accomplish. It takes a long time. You got to become your own master. You can't rely on another master. But it's a long, short path because once you accomplish that, you have it. You have it. You own it. And so no matter what challenge or what circumstance you're going to face in the future, you'll be able to figure it out because you're a master of that path that you're on. There's a very cute story. Maybe you've heard of a singer. His name is Moshe Yes. Moshe Yes growing up, he was still is one of my legends of Jewish music. So Moshe Yes, he passed away maybe about 10, 15 years ago. He was a Baal Teshuvah from the 1960s, 1970s, and incredibly talented musician, songwriter. So when he became religious, he put all his efforts into creating Jewish music, and he was a bit of a pioneer in creating amazing Jewish songs in English, but the themes and the ideas that he would express through his stories, through his lyrics, were truly inspiring and unbelievable. So there's one song I remember as a child, and I still listen to it today. It's called The Wagoneer. And The Wagoneer is a song about a grand rabbi who was very popular among all the different cities around town, and everyone would try to bring him out for a Shabbat, to speak and to lecture and to meet people. And then he had a wagon driver, and the wagon driver took him wherever they went. And he would sit with him, and the rabbi would hold a lecture, and then people would ask questions. He would answer all the questions. And then the Wagoneer would take it to the next town. But this Wagoneer one day got very upset, and he says, here's the Grand Rabbi. He gets all of the attention. He gets treated so well. When we come to a town, he gets the fancy room, the fancy bed. He gets all the hospitality. And I get stuck in the barn. I sleep with the horses. I'm just a simple Wagoneer. He says, I've been with this rabbi so long. I know all of his lectures. I've heard all the questions. I've heard all the answers. You know what? I could also be a rabbi. I could do exactly what he's doing. So he turns to the rabbi and he says, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of you being treated like a king and I'm treated like a peasant. We're going to turn this around over here. Next up, you're going to take my place. I'm going to take your place. You'll be the Wagoneer. You'll be put up in the barn with the horses. I'll be given the grand welcome, the royal welcome, and I'll act as the rabbi. So the rabbi said, okay, fine. You want to try it out? Try it out. Sure enough, the Wagoneer, he dresses in the rabbi's clothing and he's brought to the central synagogue of the town. Everyone's excited. Thousands of people have flocked in to hear him, and he delivers the lecture. He's heard the same lecture from the rabbi 20 times. He delivers it fluently, perfectly, flawlessly. Then come all the questions, and he knows the questions. He's heard them all, and he gives all the answers. Suddenly there's a question he never heard before. A strong question. And all of a sudden, he's caught off guard, and he gulps, and he stutters, and he murmurs, and he's getting uncomfortable, and he's turning red in the face, and he's starting to panic because he has no idea about this question and how to answer it. And then he was clever enough to come up with a wise answer, and he says, that question is also clear. Let it be answered by my Wagoneer. Dum, da, dum, da, dum, dum, dum. That's the song. The Wagoneer is the short, long path. Sure, he had it all, but not because he built it, not because he earned it, but because he took it from somebody else. The rabbi was the long, short path. So let's get back to our discussion. All of these students, these great Hasidic masters, are trying to understand how to achieve the goal. This goal of connection, this goal of spiritual enlightenment, this goal of advancing a spiritual path, a spiritual journey in life to gain mastery over self, connection with others, connection with God, and to be able to achieve destiny, achieve what God wants from us in this world, to be a beacon of truth and light in this world. How? Many of them came to the following conclusion, and they said as follows. The short, long path is the answer. They said, we are not really capable of attaining true truth in this world. Who are we to be able to truly grasp God, truly grasp the ultimate secrets and the depths of what God desired from in this world? We'll never be able to attain that, to experience that, be able to understand it. That's not possible. Instead, we just have to follow the path of faith. Faith was this path of spiritual service. And faith essentially says, believe that what is said and what is taught is true. Because it is true. Believe in it and follow the word of the law, follow the Torah, do the mitzvot with faith. And achieve transcendence, which means your mind, your heart, your inner faculties, maybe they don't get it. Probably they for sure don't get it. But it doesn't matter. You have to transcend that. You have to live from the depths of your soul. And you have to live with the truths that you truly believe in and have conviction in them. And live a life of happiness, a life of faith, and a life of excitement. Knowing that even if you're not part of the story, meaning your inner faculties, your inner consciousness, because you'll never understand it, but you know when you have conviction and faith that you're following the true path. And in fact, someone's going to help you. And that's going to be a Rebbe, a Tzaddik. A Tzaddik is somebody who has achieved truth. How many people can be that kind of Tzaddik? Very few. What you will do is you'll connect with a Tzaddik. And you'll learn from them. And you'll let them do the work for you. You'll hear from them, they'll inspire you. You'll watch how they pray and that'll excite you. You'll watch how they perform their service, how they perform their worship, and that'll inspire you. And your goal is to be so connected to this tzaddik that you will live a life inspired. And with your faith and your inspiration, you will enjoy a life of happiness, a life of ecstasy, of doing that which you were created to do. You know, it's a bit like an employee in a business. Some employees in some businesses. A classic employee can say as follows: I'm giving orders from my boss, from my superior, do this, come here, go there, and I do whatever I'm told. What if I have a question? I have a question that I don't really understand what I'm doing, how it's benefiting the business. I don't even understand the goal of what I'm doing. Like, actually, I would do things differently. Or what's the whole point? Or maybe it's not necessary what I'm doing. So at standard employee, we say, don't ask questions. You're not told to understand. It's not your job. You weren't hired to understand over here. We have the big CEO and the superiors who have the grand vision, who know where this is going, who know what they're trying to build and accomplish, and they're delegating you a task. You fulfill the task and know and rely on us that this is going towards the success of the business. And the employee does that. He shows up to work with faith, with excitement, not knowing all the answers, not knowing where it's truly going, but he knows he's doing his part and believing in what is being told. That's the employee. Maybe nowadays we want different kinds of employees, ones that are more engaged, ones that are more interested, ones that are more invested. Okay, depending on the model of your company. That's what this path was. Now, this is the short path. However, it's also the long path. Because no matter how much you try to ignore your own intuitions and your own senses and your own mind and say, my questions are of no significance and what I do or don't understand doesn't really matter. I'm just connecting with pure faith to the Torah, to the tzaddik. I'm following their advice, I'm following their guidance, and I'm living in that way. At the end of the day, how much can you ignore yourself? You have a mind, you have a heart. Your mind has thoughts, your mind has questions, your heart has feelings, you have impulses. And at some point on that journey, you're going to be stuck because your mind and your heart are going to challenge you. And they're going to ask you questions. Question like, why? And what for? And we don't understand. And what's the point? And what are you gaining? Now, when you're faced with those questions, you're not equipped with any answers. What you are able to do, what you've been doing up until now, is ignoring that and overriding that and casting that aside and transcending that. And now you've lived a life of spiritual ecstasy and happiness and joy and faith. However, you're going to be challenged at some point in life. But that's the cost. You know, there's a pro and a con to everything, but that's the short, long path that many of the Alter Rebbe's colleagues said, that's what we're going to continue for the future. And we see that there are many Hasidic communities like that even until today. And they're very much focused on connecting with their tzaddik and learning from him and having him rub off on them. And there's, you know, very famous at many of these gatherings, the Tish of the Rebbe, he distributes shirayim, some of his food, so he eats a little bit and gives out the food. So any connection you can have from the food and other gifts and being alongside, all of those help you to transcend your inner self, which is unable to connect with those real truths, and allowing the tzaddik to pick you up and the truths of the Torah to navigate you towards living a life of doing what you're supposed to do. The Alter Rebbe, Reb Shlomo Zalman of Liadi, one of the colleagues also, he said, no, absolutely not. That's not a path to take. That's a short, long path, and it's never going to get you there. And more than that, it's actually disingenuous. Because if you can't be true to yourself, then you can't be true to the truth. The two go hand in hand. Yourself, because you're a creation from God. God gave you your talents, your mind, and your heart. If that stands in conflict, if that stands outside of your spiritual holy experiences, then something is wrong over here. And so the Alter Rebbe said, we have to follow the path of Chabad. Chabad stands for Chachma Bin Adat, which are the three cerebral, intellectual faculties of the mind. And the path was, no one's going to do the work for you. You got to do the work yourself. There's no one or nothing else to rely on. You cannot just have faith and then follow and obey. But you have to truly understand. And you have to work hard. And you have to do your own homework. And you have to ask the big questions. And you have to try to figure out the big answers. And when you're going to have one answer, you're going to have another question. And you have to try to acclimate your mind that it understands all the inner spiritual scientific workings of the universe, so that you can build your own inner, deep, true, genuine connection with God and with Torah, with the world and with others. It has to come from you. So it's not so much a life of faith, but it's a life of enlightenment. That's the difference. Do we pursue faith? The difference will be inspiration or enlightenment, or faith or mind, or transcendence or immanence. The first path pursued faith and inspiration and transcendence, and the Chabad path pursued enlightenment and the work of the mind and the path of immanence, to recognize God and the truth of the universe and the truth of my life needs to come from me, deep inside my mind and my heart. I need to feel it. I need to understand it. By the way, this two different schools of thought, and they were fiery clashes between each other. And Reb Aaron of Kalisk and other great tzaddikim really ridiculed the Alter Rebbe, and they said that's following the path of the mind and allowing the free thinking and the workings of the mind to try to develop its own understanding. What a dangerous path. We're going to lose our people. We're going to lose our children, because the mind's a dangerous place. We cannot go there. We cannot ever fathom. We just have to follow with blind faith. That was their argument. The Alter Rebbe argued back, and he said, my friends, developing an emotion that doesn't come from the mastery of the mind is a disingenuous emotion. You want to be happy, you want to be excited, you want to be enthusiastic, you want to love God. It has to be an emotion that's born from your mind, born from knowledge. You want to truly connect? How do we learn in the very first union of the first two people in the universe, Adam and Chava? The Torah says about them, when actually she became impregnated and they had a relationship with each other, Adam yada et Chava. Adam knew Eve. What a strange word. He knew Eve. He didn't just know her. They spent the night with each other. But to connect with somebody is to know somebody. You know, this short, long way and long, short way plays out in so many areas in life, right? It could be in a professional area, right? Whatever career you're pursuing, whether you want to be the doctor, the lawyer, or whatever it is. So some students say, I want to master this. I want to be the master of my field. And I'm going to read every single textbook, and I'm going to follow diligently in class. I'm not just going to accept what the professor is telling me and their book list, but I'm going to do much more work because I need to really master this. So they become, that's the long, short way. The short, long way would be, here, let me borrow your Cliff Notes. Give me the summaries of all the lectures. Let me just be spoon-fed that knowledge. Let me know what I have to know, and I'll never be able to understand more anyhow. And I know that the professor knows what he's talking about, so let me learn from the master. Let me rely on them, and I'll just always be feeding off them. You can have that. You can have the same, by the way, in a relationship between, let's say, husband and wife, or two friends. A spouse, right? The kind of relationship you have. What kind of relationship do you have? So you may say to each other, you know, and let's say an issue arises, right? Something which is bothering somebody, or something, or someone's upset about something. One path could be, let's not go there. I don't want to open a can of worms. I don't want to enter in this deep conversation that's going to last days or weeks trying to figure out. I don't want to get so deep and so bogged down by understanding who and what and why and what if and how can we change. Let's just slip it under the rug. Let's keep our relationship smooth and cool. I love you, you love me. It's all good. I'm going to try not to upset you. You try not to upset me. I'll respect you, respect me. And let's keep it smooth. Let's just keep a smooth relationship with each other. I don't want it to be rocky and bumpy. Now, maybe that works for some people. That would be a short, long way. A short way meaning it's easier. I'm not going to ever address the difficult questions and the difficult tensions that are underlying over here. We're not even going to go there. It's short, but it's long, because at some point, something's going to happen that's going to explode if you never try to address them. The long, short way would be, let's sit down. Let's truly understand what's going on over here. Yes, I love you, you love me. Yes, it's a very beautiful relationship, but there's also stuff going on. Let's go there. Let's dig deep and let's deal with each other and understand why someone's hurt, why somebody's not getting it, it's not working out. Maybe even apologize. Maybe figure out how we can adapt to each other. How can we respect, be more flexible? That's a difficult thing to have. Some people much prefer not to deal with that. But if you do deal with that, could you imagine the level of the bond you're eventually going to create? So it's the longer way, but it's the shorter way. So in every accomplishment in life, and every goal, there could be the short way or the long way. And each one has a short and a long element to it. And this is how it's applied in this spiritual life of living our life as we should, connecting to God and to each other and to ourselves. There's a story of, in the times of Reb Dober, of the Alter Rebbe, there was another great tzaddik. His name was Reb Chaim Chaikel of Amdur. Now, Reb Chaim Chaikel of Amdur belonged to the school of thought about the short, long way. And he nurtured a group, a community of Hasidim that they connected with him. And he fed them, and he inspired them, and he picked them up. They lived off his inspiration and of his holiness, and with that, with their faith and their connection, that's how they connected with God. The Alter Rebbe was very different. The Alter Rebbe demanded from his followers, don't just look at me. I'll help you, I'll guide you, but it's in your hands, it's not in my hands. You've got to do the work. You've got to study the text. You've got to try to figure it out on your own. You've got to come to your own understanding, and I'll be there to help. But you've got to own it. So a student of the Alter Rebbe once came to complain to him, and he said, every day I daven in the synagogue, and next to me is a follower, a student of the other Rebbe, Reb Chaim Chaikel of Amdur. And I'm very jealous, because every single morning when this Chassid comes to the synagogue, he's always on fire. He's always so happy, so enthusiastic. He puts on his tefillin, he puts on his talit, he opens up the siddur, and he's like a ball of fire, reciting, screaming those words of prayer, talking to Hashem in such an animated, enthusiastic way, like ecstasy. And me, I come every morning and I'm trying to break my head, and I'm following a text I'm trying to study to get me focused, and I'm reflecting on myself, and I'm evaluating what I do understand and what I don't understand. And if I'm truly genuine, I'm not so truly genuine. Is it real, the things that I'm feeling, or it's not so real? I go through torture every single day. Alter Rebbe buried his head in his hand, which he often did, to think, and then he responded, and he told him, it's true that your friend next to you is always on fire, but you should know, was brennt. It's not his own fire burning within him. So the brand von Reb Chaim Chaikel, it's the fire of his Rebbe that's burning inside him. He's being fueled by the tzaddik. And I ask you to fuel yourself. A long, short way. And if you analyze spiritual texts from different tzaddikim discourses, you'll notice a very similar thing. A lot of times, a lot of the spiritual texts and the writings and the commentaries from some of these great tzaddikim of the short, long way are very brief texts, brief bursts of knowledge, bursts of ideas that will tickle you, that will inspire you, that will turn you on. Whereas the texts of the Alter Rebbe and the texts of many of the other Chabad Rebbes are very lengthy and are very comprehensive. And you can't just study 5 lines and then walk out with a gift and excited, but you've got to study for an hour, 6 pages, if you're lucky. And then you're going to come back the next day, and maybe after 3 months, or maybe after 6 years, so it's a long journey, because it's, when you have like a diary, maybe an app on your phone, and very often, the app shows every morning an inspirational thought. So you open up these diaries, every day there's a thought for the day. Right? Today's thought, let's say, is, I'm just going to make one up, but today's thought is, today, remember, you are a gift from God. God allowed you to wake up for you to recognize you are necessary in this world. Wow. Read that, and it can turn you on. And it can give you a boost for your morning. You're waking up feeling a little down about yourself, not very confident, and not really sure what you're accomplishing here. And all of a sudden you're being told, you're the man. You're the man for the moment. It's your life. Take it. Run with it. On the flip side, someone else may come along and say, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't understand the word of being said. I mean, it's very inspiring, it's very beautiful, but let's break it down. Who's this God that we're talking about that's even saying these things? And what does it mean he created the universe? How did he create this universe? And then go ahead creating you. But what kind of intention went into creating you? What role do you even play? And what role do you play vis-a-vis the role that another person plays? And what's your relationship with him and their relationship with him? And you can ask a million questions that you really break it down to understand like what's the science? What's the formula behind this proclamation? Well, that's what the long, shorter way does. So it's much more difficult, but imagine eventually when you get it. Now I want to add one more piece over here. The long, shorter way tells you as follows. It's not only the things you can understand, try to understand, and the things you can't understand, turn to faith. Tells you the things that you can't understand, you have to also try to understand. And as you're trying to understand that which you can't understand, you end up understanding better why it is that you can't understand what you can't understand. Did you follow that? If you just drop it all and say it's a matter of faith, you never get into the depths. You never get into a true appreciation of what it is that you can't understand, or why can't you understand it. You never appreciate the beauty, the magnitude of that which is so deep and profound and true and transcendent. But the more you try to, the more you discover, the more you try to know things, the more you can discover how much you don't know and why you can't know them, which is an amazing thing also. That's why, I'll tell you one story and then I want to end up with one last teaching. That's why you'll notice another interesting distinction between these two communities, the community of the short, long way or the community of the long, short way. The focus on miracles. One second. In the community of the short, long way, who are the people who were dedicating themselves with faith and conviction to the Torah, to truth, to faith in the tzaddik, and allowing themselves to be carried and swept away by the tzaddik's piety and inspiration, they were also very focused on the miracles that a tzaddik can perform. A tzaddik can certainly perform miracles. A person who has attained the ultimate truth, they have access to the forces of the universe, access to God in a unique way. They can create miracles and bless people with children who are infertile. They can change all kinds of things. It's very possible. The question is if that's something that we pursue. And in those communities, they pursued it. They glorified it. They built a lot of their faith around it. Whereas in the community of the long, short way, which was the community of those who said we have to figure it out ourselves, we have to deal with the here and now reality. Let's not run away. Let's not escape. Let's not just try to elevate with transcendence and ignore the realities in our life and our minds and our hearts and the realities of the world. No. We can't ignore it. We have to. It's a part of God's world, right? So when something is not going right, something does not make sense, not fitting into the grand plan of God, there's two things you can do. One thing you could say is, forget about it. Run away. Connect with God. The other thing you can do is say, no, we can't forget about it. This is real. This is part of God's world. We need to work through this. We need to figure this out. We need to put the pieces together. So that school didn't really pursue miracles per se. It wasn't a school of transcendence. It was a school of immanence. It was trying to figure out the truth of life and of the Torah of Hashem in the here and now of the world. So there's a beautiful story that portrays these two ideas. The grandchild of the great tzaddik, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, he was a tzaddik that belonged to the school of the short, long way. His grandchild married the grandchild of the Alter Rebbe, who was from the school of the long, short way. And now they're coming together for a simcha. They're like mechotanim together, grandparents. So they were holding hands with each other, walking towards the chuppah. And they arrived at a doorway, and the doorway was very narrow. Only one person could fit at a time. Now, here's also one part of the beauty part of the story. Nowadays, everybody would try to get in first. I'll go first, and then you can go in. It's my granddaughter, it's her grandson. If I'm paying for the wedding, I go first. By then, it was the other way around. Each one was arguing that the other should go first. Rebbe Levi Yitzchak talked to the Alter Rebbe and said, "You go first." And Alter Rebbe said, "No, you go first." They didn't know what to do. So here was the solution. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, from the path of the short, long way, he said, it's not a problem. Let's just walk through the wall. A wall? Walls don't matter. We don't have to get caught up in the reality of here and now. We'll just transcend. The Alter Rebbe responded, no, we can't walk through the wall. But what we can do is a miracle. We can widen the doorway. And this way, we'll both be able to fit through. You see the two paths and the thinking over there. This debate, I want you to understand, this debate of the long, short way versus the short, long way actually is rooted much deeper in Jewish history. And I want to bring one example, an example from the Rambam, Maimonides, versus his great antagonist known as the Raavad, Rebbe Eliezer ben David. The Raavad was somebody that was a little disappointed by the Rambam for whatever reason. There was politics, or not just politics, but he didn't appreciate the whole style of the Rambam. And he wrote a commentary to try as much as possible to argue with and refute the Rambam. Now we find a couple places where we see this is their paradigm. They're coming from two different places of the long, short way or the short, long way. I'm going to give you two examples. Example number one. In the Rambam's Code of Jewish Law, he is discussing the idea of free choice of a person. I have the quote over here. Free choice. Does mankind have free choice? And the Rambam says mankind certainly has free choice. That's what we believe. Which means at any time you choose and no one's forcing you how you're going to choose. However, the Rambam writes as follows. I'm going to read it out. God, of course, knows all that transpires. The big question, how can you have free choice if God knows everything, including your choice? Now, before a particular deed was done, did God know whether the person would be righteous or wicked, or did he not know? If he knew that the person would be righteous, then it's not possible for that person not to be so. And if you say that he did not know, then God's knowledge was not complete. The big question. It can't be both. It can't be that God, on the one hand, God has to know because he's complete. The other hand, if he knows, he doesn't have free choice. How could it be? So the Rambam says, know that the answer to this question is longer than the land and its measure and broader than the sea. In other words, whoa, this is out there. And that many great foundations and lofty mountains hang upon it. But understand well what I'm going to say. We have already explained in the second chapter of the Laws of Torah's Foundations that God does not know with a mind that is distinct from his being, as is the case with man, whose being and mind are two distinct entities. Rather, he and his mind are one and the same, a concept that is impossible for the human to fully comprehend. Thus, just as man cannot discover and grasp the truth of the Creator, so too, no man can discover and grasp the mind of his Creator. In the words of the prophets, my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways as my ways. And I'm not going to go to break down that text right now, even if I could, kind of a little bit, but that's what the Rambam is saying. He gives a whole lengthy exposition of why we can't really understand it, but he's explaining why we can't understand it, and he's giving us an insight into God's workings versus human workings, and God's mind versus human mind. It's a very deep text. The Raavad, in his commentary, says, whoa. This author did not act in the manner of the wise. One ought not to begin something that one is not capable of concluding. He begins by posing a difficult question, then remains with the difficulty and reverts to faith. It would have been better for him to have left it as a matter of faith for the innocent instead of making them aware of the contradiction and leaving their minds in doubt. See what's going on over here? The Rambam is busy getting all detailed and all deep in the big questions. He said, I'm not going to leave this go. I'm going to raise the questions. We're going to approach this. And we're going to try to figure it out. And when we come to a dead end, we'll explain what that dead end is. And we're going to walk home with a lot of questions because we don't understand, but we know what the questions are. And the Raavad said, whoa, then what'd you gain? Why'd you ask those questions? You should never have written that whole commentary. You should never have got into the whole dispute, the debate, the contradiction between man's free choice and God's omnipotence and omniscience. No, leave it out. No one can understand it anyhow. So what do you gain by getting caught up and grappling with it? There we see two different paths right away. Is there a value of trying to mentally, cerebrally, emotionally explore and understand and comprehend and experience things that are unattainable, out of our grasp? Or do we say, it's not for us, drop it, and just accept it with simple, blind faith? The Rambam versus the Ravid. Here's another example, by the way, and this is about Abraham. Everyone knows Abraham, Avram Avinu, he first was the one to discover God. He was raised by a pagan, idolatrous family. Everyone was worshiping idols. His father, in fact, owned an idol store. He sold all the different kinds of idols, all the different brands. Abraham smashes the idols and discovers God. And he founds the monotheistic faith, right? Abraham. Question, how old was Abraham when he discovered God? So if you ever went to Jewish day school, you probably know the answer, because you were told as a little kid, Avram was 3 years old when he discovered God. That's in fact what the Ravid says. The Ravid quotes and he says, yeah, Avram was 3 years old. The Rambam doesn't write that. The Rambam says Abraham was 40 years old when he discovered God. Last week we were looking for another example of 40. I don't think we mentioned this one. Abraham was 40 when he discovered God. Now the truth is, they're both right. Meaning, in the ancient Midrashic text, there's a number of opinions. Was he 3? Was he 13? Was he 18? Was he 40? Was he 48? There's a lot of answers. And the resolution would be, there are different stages in the discovery of God. There's a discovery of a 3-year-old, and there's a discovery of a 40-year-old, and they're not the same. The 3-year-old can discover something which it can't understand, it can't comprehend, it doesn't grasp, but it discovers. And it connects it in a way of faith. It realizes, it has an epiphany. A 3-year-old can get something. But a 40-year-old has worked many years in life, thinking through something, asking questions, finding answers, searching and searching deeper and deeper. And at 40, after all of their search in life, they've come up, Avram said there's a God. So he discovers God at 3, he discovers God at 40, but they weren't the same discovery. And which one was important to highlight as Abraham being an icon, being a model for us? So the Ravid says we should learn from Abraham, the 3-year-old. Just have faith, because you're not capable of anything more than that. Exercise your soul and your tool of faith. Ignore the mind and the heart and your inner faculties of consciousness to be able to try to figure out and understand. No. The Rambam says you need to have the level of recognition of God of the 40-year-old Abraham. The mature mind, the mind that has explored and dug deep and tried to understand and ask and walk away with bigger questions than answers, but it's all part of the package. That's the 40-year-old faith or connection with God. That's what the Rambam said. So let's summarize, because this is really amazing. Throughout Jewish history, there's been the debate about the story in the Talmud that Rabbi Yeshua tells us. Should we follow the short, long path or the long, short path? I think nowadays, in our modern world, we are being challenged in an unhealthy way by being offered and it's being projected all around us, the pursuit of the short or long path, which means everywhere around us, from educational centers to the get rich quick schemes, we're being bombarded with these short, long solutions to life. Just get rich quick and study overnight and finish it in a year and a half, not 3 years, and forget. And the challenges are coming with that because we don't really have what we have. We don't really know what we think we know. And therefore, we'll never truly be able to enjoy it or accomplish or succeed in it. And I think we need to go back a little bit. I definitely think we need to go to the long, shorter way. And we need to be putting in more effort and more work in a more difficult way to be able to truly master that which we're trying to accomplish. And all the more so in the spiritual realm of the connections and the redemptions we're trying to create in our life and in our world. But now I hope you have a greater understanding of this great debate in Jewish history. And in the spiritual way, they're both relevant, they're both important. The path of faith of the short, long way is extremely important. You can have both at the same time. It's not like in the crossroads of the Talmud, where you can only travel this path or that path. In the spiritual path, you can have the best of both worlds. You can explore and try to strengthen the faith, the raw, blind faith of the short, long path. And at the same time, you can allow yourself to get deep and entangled in the Chabad, in the mental exercises of a long, short path. One is not exclusive from the other. Hopefully, we're on the path. Hopefully, we're getting closer to those connections. Hopefully, we're building connections to inspire and enlighten ourselves. The work of the mind and the work of faith. And we'll be able to create for ourselves and for our surroundings a more peaceful world, a more connected world, a world filled with the light and the truth, God and of our Torah. Friends, maybe not mastery, but the journey is fascinating. So, Raz, very, very good. There's never going to be mastery. You're 100% right, because there's going to be this, like the Rambam said, at some point you're going to run into a problem, because some things are ungraspable. That's a word. But the journey of trying to grasp it, and of success and of failure, and of asking, answering, and then leaving off with a bigger question, is even more enriching and is more inclusive of your mind and your heart and your inner consciousness than just relegating it to the side and transcending it, circumventing it, and just connecting with pure faith. So great question, great comment. Outstanding. Okay, key is to find a teacher, guide, and spiritual coach to take the long path together. Gary, very true, very, very true. That's one of the hardest parts of the whole thing, finding the proper mentor and spiritual master to help not do the work for you. I don't believe in that, but help guide your path and guide you onto your path. So great points. Thank you everybody for joining us, and good night. See you same time, same place next week, and God bless you.